Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Sportsbook Confidential. My name is John Sullivan, and I'm coming to you live from the FingerLakes1.com studios in Seneca Falls, New York. And this little show here is to help you learn and grow as a sports bettor. And today we're going to talk playoffs. We got the NHL starting up. They've got about a week or so left of regular season games, with the exception of the Canucks, who had all those COVID cancellations. They've got like an extra 4 or 5 games to play. I guess the NHL has decided to play all those games out. I don't know if they're going to have any impact on the playoff standings. But we're going to talk about how there's a unique playoff format this year in the NHL, and that may lead to some value in betting on the futures. So we'll look at the futures odds. And then I'm going to continue my racing weekends. We've got NASCAR at Darlington on Sunday. And there's some interesting odds there, and also the Spanish Grand Prix in Formula One, and we've been riding the Lewis Hamilton train, and I think we're going to do it again. We'll talk about that as well. But before we do any of that, let's do what we always do and update my bankroll. And it was not a pleasant week. Not unexpected, though. We had Brooklyn Strong in the Kentucky Derby. Win, place, and show did not pay off. The horse, I thought, positioned itself really well. Eventually was just outclassed. It was. I really felt strongly that this was going to be a year where the favorite didn't win. There's just so many horses had such limited outings because of the travel issues with COVID, that there was going to be, somebody that was going to shine through, and obviously it was one of the Baffert horses with Medina Spirit. So that was a loser for us. And then we had Lewis Hamilton in the Portugal Grand Prix, plus 160. Last week I went off on how he was so high. He started out third, but worked his way to the front and was able to keep it. Plus $14 to the bankroll there. And then in the race last week, the Kansas race, we had Logano, Elliott, and Harvick. Harvick finished second. He's very good on those intermediate tracks. Elliott finished fifth, but minus $12 to the bankroll. We had Eric Jones top 10. A full unit, minus $8 to the bankroll. If you do the math, that's minus $18 overall. Makes our new bankroll $212 and our bet size $7 going forward. So we continue to struggle with the bankroll, but we manage it tightly. We try to be selective, and hopefully we can turn things around. But the whole point of managing the bankroll is not necessarily we're not trying to maximize growth. That's an advanced strategy. We are trying to manage the bankroll so that we can continue to wager every week. And we have this money set aside that we started with. And even though it's not as much as I started with, it still gives me something to work with going forward. And that's the whole idea from a beginner to intermediate standpoint. So let's go on and talk. Before we get back to racing, let's talk about the NHL playoffs. And this year, we're going back. Last year, we had the COVID playoffs, and we had a 24-team playoff system. This year, we're going back to 16 playoff teams. The top 4 from each division are going to make the playoffs. But this year, they play down to like a sole survivor scenario. So all the teams from the East will play. They'll have playoff series till there's one team left from the East and one team left from the North. One team left from the Central, one team left from the West, a Final Four, if you will. And that goes back to the Adams Division days, and back when there were 16 out of 21 teams making the playoffs. So the Final Four matchups, when they get down to the Final Four remaining teams, are based on their regular season point totals. So as of right now, I believe the Carolina Hurricanes have the most points in the league. So they would be the number 1 seed if they made the Final Four. Obviously, they would give them home ice. But the point is, you don't know which team you're going to be facing in the semifinals until all the divisions have finish their playoffs. So, it could very well be Toronto in Tampa Bay, or it could be Pittsburgh and Carolina, or the West could meet the East, or the West could meet the North. You don't know, because you have to know who those Final Four teams are before you find out what the matchups are, and that's important because you can't look ahead and see which team has the easiest path to the Stanley Cup final, and then you say to yourself, well, why do you need to know that? Who has the easiest path? Well, that's because if you're going to bet a future on the Stanley Cup, then you want the team that has the easiest path to the final. If they make it to the final, you can hedge your bet and lock in a profit. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for good value, a chance to earn a big payday with a little bit amount of money down. And not only that, but we get a sweat for the duration of the playoffs, the 2 or 3 months of the playoffs. So the North Division, which is all Canadian teams, the playoffs may happen in a bubble. Believe it or not, in Canada, the COVID situation is worse than it is in the United States. They have issues with controlling the spread and vaccine availabilities. And then, of course, the one surviving Canadian team, the team that finishes as the remaining team from the North Division, will have to travel to the U.S. to play in the playoffs. So it doesn't look good. It's the toughest road for the Canadian team to win a Stanley Cup. So that is probably already baked into the odds, but we'll see. You can hedge if a team makes the semifinals. You have to realize that you're looking at about a quarter of the profit of what the ticket would pay if you just let it ride and it won outright. So you have to kind of bake that in when you're deciding which futures to bet on and what type of value that you think you're going to need to hold on to that ticket. So let's take a quick look at the playoff teams or the teams with even a remote shot of the playoffs, and we'll start with the East. And these teams are bunched pretty close together. The Capitals, the Penguins, the Bruins, and the Islanders. And you can see the Stanley Cup odds are very even, 11, 12, 13, and 17 to 1. I feel like the Penguins have been the most consistent of the teams that throughout the season. I question goaltending. I think is a big issue in the East. You've got the Capitals with Vanacek and Samsonov, unproven playoff goalies. I do like Samsonov a lot. I think he will probably end up being. I would be very surprised if Vanacek is the starting goalie in the playoffs. I don't know. It depends on how healthy they are. And then Pittsburgh, you've got Tristan Jarry as your number one goalie, and he did play a little bit in the playoffs in the previous year. I don't know. I mean, he's that unknown quantity like Jordan Binnington was, but he's going to need to have that kind of magical playoff run for them to compete for a cup. And then the Bruins are going to go with Rask, which kind of surprises me because, he, in my opinion, quit on the team last year in the COVID playoffs. And they do have, they got some good kids there. They got Halak as the second, as the backup, but they got two young kids, Swayman and the other fella, I can't remember his name, for the future. But this is going to be Tuukka Rask's last ride. I think that Boston is the team, obviously with Taylor Hall, improved themselves at the trade deadline. Capitals also improved themselves with Anthony Mantha, and they've got Chara and Carlson as their top defensemen. Washington is poised for another cup run. The goaltending is the issue. Boston is going to be a very difficult out. But once again, is Tuukka. He doesn't seem to be the same Tuukka Rask in years past. I just, from what I've watched this year, he seems to be a much more beatable goalie. So it's going to be up to the defense of the Bruins to, eliminate a lot of the shot chances. And then the Islanders, finally, I just don't think they have enough in the goaltending department and in the goal scoring department. They're very good. I think their power play is good, but Sorokin and Varlamov, I don't think they had a very bad second half of the year. I feel like they're not in a good spot. Maybe they'll turn it around in the playoffs, but I feel like the Islanders have really struggled down the stretch, and I don't think they're going to be a factor. And if the Capitals and the Islanders play in the first round, you might want to look at taking that series price on the Capitals. It'll probably be like minus 200, but that should be, I think, would be pretty easy money. Stranger things have happened. There's no such thing as a sure thing. So coming out of the East, I feel like the odds are, obviously you look at the odds and I would say the Bruins at 13-1. As much as I hate to say that, I'm not a Bruins fan. I feel like the Caps, the Caps were right around 18-1 until they got Mantha, and then they've been 11-1 ever since. They've been resting Ovechkin. I think those are the two teams that are going to battle it out. And let's move on to the Great White North and the NFC North. We've got, obviously, the Toronto Maple Leafs. They're the New York Yankees of hockey as far as payroll and star power go. Their top four lines are just stacked with names from the present and the past. Austin Matthew, Mitch Marner. You've got John Tavares. You've got Jason Spezza. You've got Joe Thornton. It's just, an embarrassment of riches offensively for that team. However, you've got Jack Campbell and David Riddick as your goalies, and Campbell did start the season 11-0, which broke a NHL record, and that's been great. But is he the guy that's going to take them to a Stanley Cup? I really don't know. I mean, it would be a great feel-good story, but that's the big question for this team. I feel like this team does not have the goaltending to win a Stanley Cup. And it warms my heart to know that the Leafs fans will have to suffer along with us Sabres fans. And then you've got all these other teams in the North Division that I think have a legitimate shot in a series to beat Toronto. Edmonton, of course, their goaltending is also going to be an issue, but in a 7-game series to beat Toronto, I feel like they've got a shot. They've got McDavid and Draisaitl, so 18-1 is pretty juicy there. Winnipeg is 30-1 now. They have some injuries. It's going to be tough for them to compete in the playoffs. I think they have the best goalie in this division in Connor Hellebuyck, but it's going to be a tough road to hoe for them. But and then the Canadiens at 25-1, and the one interesting thing about this is that it's likely that the Leafs and the Canadiens are going to play in the first round. The Canadiens have given the Leafs lots of trouble this year. It's been difficult a matchup for Toronto. So that's another reason why in the back of my head I'm going Toronto is not a good futures bet here. And then once again you have to remember that it's most likely, the NHL can change the rules at any given time, but it's most likely that the Canadian team will have to cross the border to the U.S. and play the Final Fours down here in the States. So maybe if they do play the North Division in a bubble, that they'll play it in Toronto. Last year they had their bubble playoffs in Toronto and Vancouver. I don't know which one. Technically, Vancouver and Calgary are still alive for a playoff spot, but it's very unlikely that either one will get in. Let's move on to the Central, and this is the one division where that last playoff spot is up for grabs. However, those first three teams in the division are just they're all, I think, in the top 5 or 6 in the league in points. Carolina Hurricanes leading the league in points. They've been healthy all year. Very good offensively skilled team. You've got Dougie Hamilton and with Norris trophy consideration. But the goaltending has been unbelievable with James Reimer. And they just got Peter Mrazek back, who was their playoff goalie last year. And then they had a young fella goalie came in. I think he's a Russian goalie, and his last name began with N. Escapes me at the moment, but has played very well for them. They're just stocked for the playoffs, and they've been rolling at about 8-1 up until recently. Now they're plus 650. Of course, they got to come out of this division where there's going to be 2 other very tough teams. Getting the number 1 spot in this division is going to be a huge boon to your playoff chances, because if you're the 2 versus 3 matchup, you don't want to be Carolina against Tampa Bay in the first round. You don't want to be Tampa Bay against Florida in the first round. You want to be the team that gets the Nashville-Dallas Stars slot. That's the team you want to play in the first round to get you one step closer to the Cup. So Tampa Bay, obviously defending champs. It's one of those, it's been kind of a grind for Tampa Bay this year. They have not been, they really were playing well very early in the year. And since then, it's been kind of a grind. They've been up and down. Their window is still open here, but Vasilevsky is really going to have to shine to get through what they're facing in this divisional playoff format, especially because it looks like they're going to get the Florida Panthers in the first round. And Florida is easily, in my opinion, the most improved team in the NHL. The big question is, are they going to get regular season Bob or playoff Bob? And when I say Bob, I mean Sergei Bobrovsky, former Vezina winner, who has been magnificent this year in Florida during the regular season. He has kind of disappeared. He had stretches in Philly and Columbus where he was just an amazing goalie during the regular season and just disappeared in the playoffs. And then he signed with Florida, and he had a year or two where he was just kind of not that great overall. Just it seemed like he was very disinterested. And now that there's a team in front of him that can score goals, that's highly skilled, maybe the pressure's off for him, and he can just concentrate on being a goalie again. But whatever they're doing down there is working, and they're right in the mix with Tampa Bay and Carolina as far as the point standings. So even in the last week, that could shuffle a little bit. But it is most likely that Tampa Bay and Florida are going to play in the first round. Tough matchup for both teams, and just based on the goalie matchups, I would have to take the Lightning over the Panthers because Vasilevsky's a proven goalie. Bobrovsky has never lived up to that playoff potential, but he's their guy. That's who they're going to ride with. So you got to live with that if you take a future on the Panthers. And then the Predators are a team that is really just starting to play well, and they've taken this playoff spot away from the Dallas Stars. The Stars are 4 points back with a week to go. They're not out of it, but if the Stars, of course, if you remember last year in the COVID playoffs, the Stars were in the final, Stanley Cup final, against the Lightning, and now they ended up in the same division this year. But if the Stars do get in, look out. Because that's a team that knows how to get it done in the playoffs. But they've certainly got 3 very, very tough teams to make the Final Four. So if you wanted to throw a few bucks on the Stars at 100-1, I wouldn't blame you. But they've got to do a lot of work in the next week just to even make the playoffs. But if they get in, they could be competitive. As far as Nashville goes, UC Saros is actually the starting goalie now, and Pekka Rinne is the backup. Which one they use for the playoffs, I don't know. But they're skating very well, and they've been scoring goals, and will be a tough out if they make the playoffs. And then finally, we're going to go to the NHL West. And this is where you have the two betting favorites for the Stanley Cup. The Vegas Golden Knights at plus 500 and the Colorado Avalanche at plus 450. The Avalanche are the number one favorite to win the Stanley Cup money odds-wise. However, I think that the Avalanche have everything except goaltending. Grubauer got hurt, and they traded for Devin Dubnyk, and they traded for Jonas Janssen from the Sabres, and I just don't see how they get through with the goaltending they have without Grubauer. I don't. They have the other goalie Sarkwa or what, I can't pronounce his name at the moment, but they had goalie injuries, and without their top two that they had at the beginning of the year, I don't see how they make it. I don't feel like that's a good bet. Somebody will probably prove me wrong and make a lot of money on it, but I feel like the Golden Knights are actually have a better chance of coming out of this division, so I feel like that would be a better wager for you. The Wild are a very good team in a very tough division. They just have two really powerhouse teams in front of them, and I don't see them beating both of those teams. I could see them in a short series beating one of them. But it's just too much to overcome to get to the Final Four. If they didn't have that, if it was a different mix of playoff teams for them, they might have a shot. St. Louis, Jordan Binnington won the Stanley Cup 2 years ago. He has not put that type of run together since. Goalies get hot and streaky. That's just the way it goes in the NHL. That's what they're going to need. But that team has a lot of veterans. In the last month, they have been competitive against Colorado and Vegas, but there's a big question of whether how intense those teams have been playing versus resting for the playoffs. But obviously, St. Louis is not. All four of these teams are legit playoff teams and not easy outs, so they should be highly contested series. There just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of betting value in this. Obviously, the best goaltending in this division is Vegas with Robin Lehner and Marc-Andre Fleury, without question. So those are all the futures odds for the NHL. I'm really partial to maybe throwing a couple of futures down on the Canadian teams. I feel like once you get to the Final Four, all bets are off. You might not, the Canadian team might not get to play in front of a home crowd, but we'll just have to see. Maybe by then they will allow border crossings. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting. But I think Edmonton is a team that can really compete. When they're on, they're one of the toughest teams to beat in the league. Unfortunately, Montreal, I don't feel like you're getting enough at 25-1, but they're a very balanced, a balance of youth and experience, of toughness and scoring and goaltending. I feel like if they're healthy at the right time, they could do some damage. And then I like the East teams. If the West has to play the Central, you just don't know. It's a really amazing how uncertain it still is. But if you got the Hurricanes make it to the Final Four and they have to play the Colorado Avalanche, it's going to make it a lot easier for a team from the East, like Washington or Boston, to get to the Stanley Cup Final. And then you can lock in your profit at that point if you want, or just let it ride. So very interesting. So I hope you found that useful. Let's move on to Darlington and the Goodyear 400 this Sunday. The track Too Tough to Tame, also known as the Lady in Black, the oldest track on the NASCAR schedule, 1.33 mile egg-shaped oval. Story goes that the reason the track is that shape is because the fella that built the track couldn't buy a piece of land on one end of the track because a farmer wouldn't sell. So he had to make the egg-shaped oval instead of a completely round track. Harvick has 2 recent wins here. Denny Hamlin, Keselowski, and Eric Jones have 1 each. That's going back to 2018. Of course, I get that from driver averages. Harvick and Hamlin have not won this year. Harvick finished second last week. Hamlin was not competitive last week, but I haven't actually looked at the point standings this week, but he was the point leader up until 2 weeks ago. I feel like they're both due for a win here. This is a track they're both good at. I think that Logano is the only driver that's won twice this year. He won the dirt race, and I thought he won an earlier race this year. No driver has repeated this year, so nobody's won back-to-back. And I think other than Logano, I don't think any other drivers won more than one time. Kyle Busch won last week. He's certainly a competitive driver, but it's going to be tough for him to repeat here. I'm looking at drivers that haven't won yet that are kind of due for a win, and obviously Harvick has the best record as far as winning here, and Hamlin has an excellent record for winning here as well. Kyle Larson is actually the best finisher in the field at an average finish of 2.5. He's only got 2 starts on the Cup level, but they're a second and a third. And obviously with Hendrick Motorsports, he's going to be very competitive. And he is actually the betting favorite at plus 400. So Eric Jones, again, I found a lot of value in betting on him, and it hasn't worked out too great this year. But in 5 starts at Darlington, his worst finish is 8th. So he's always finished in the top 10. Now you have to understand that most of those starts were in the number 20 car, which is a Joe Gibbs car, and he's now racing in the number 43 for Richard Petty Racing. So will he be competitive enough? It's a combination of will his equipment, match his style. So in the restrictor plate race, both races, he's been very competitive, and I like his chances in those going forward in the 43. But in the other, last week I had him for a top 10, and he was not competitive at all, and I think he finished about 26th. But he has a very strong track record here. So you can see I put the odds. We have win 80-1, a top 3 18-1, a top 5 8-1, and a top 10 plus 235. So I feel like a top 10 is a reasonable ask here if he's finished no worse than 8th. You have to remember things can happen. You can get taken out in a wreck. All kinds of things can happen, penalties. A shortened race because of weather can affect your chances. That's part of the game. So we'll see if he makes my cut this week. And before we get to my picks, let's do the Spanish Grand Prix. And I took Lewis Hamilton last week, and I kept talking about how his odds should be totally on the other side of the board. And they were yesterday. He was plus 120 to win the Spanish Grand Prix, and I just checked right before the show, and now he's minus 120 to win the Spanish Grand Prix. So somebody is listening to me somewhere. Lewis Hamilton has won the last 4 years of the Spanish Grand Prix. He's won 4 of the last 5 poles, and I think with one exception of his last 4 wins there. He has won by like 20 plus seconds, which is a lot in Formula One. He's been dominant at this track. And basically, from what we've seen from the first 3 races, that it's him and Max Verstappen and everybody else. And not only to win the championship, but pretty much every week, unless obviously Lewis Hamilton had a wing accident in one of his races, and he ended up finishing second, passing several cars to get there. But barring, accident or equipment failure, it comes down to the odds. Are you getting a value on betting the odds on Lewis Hamilton, or are you getting value betting the odds on Max Verstappen? So as of this morning, Lewis Hamilton was plus 120 and Verstappen was plus 140. And if you look at those odds, it's insane favoring Lewis Hamilton. So right now, as we speak, the odds are Lewis Hamilton minus 120, Max Verstappen plus 175. Still not enough to go to Max Verstappen. If it got Max Verstappen plus 300 or Max Verstappen plus 350 or plus 400, then I'm like, yeah, there's a chance he can win this. He's won this race before. But I've said for the last 2 weeks that Lewis Hamilton should be in the minus on the odds, and he finally is now. I'm not saying it's a sure thing he's going to win. Anything can happen. But based on his track record as a driver overall, Mercedes' track record as the most strategic team, and his track history here, he obviously should be minus money to win this race. And the fact that I already got him at plus money is, amazing. And I've said if they give Lewis Hamilton to me at plus money every week, I'm going to take him. So with that said, let's see what I got. And for my picks this week, of course, Lewis Hamilton, I have a plus 120 full unit on him. I'm going to take Hamlin and Harvick a half unit each at Darlington. They're both due for a win. Hopefully one of those will come through and help boost the bankroll. And I'm going to take Eric Jones top 10 plus 235. I'm only going to put a half unit on it. I don't trust him in a non-restrictor plate race in the 43. So we'll have to see how he does. This is obviously his best track that in a non-restrictor plate scenario. So let's see if he's competitive or not. If he's not competitive this week, you can't trust his past record going forward. It's just how it's going to be. So at least we learned something from it, win or lose. All right, folks. Well, thank you for tuning in. A pleasure to see you again this week. Thanks for spending time with me. We'll try to get some winners this weekend, and next week we'll have another Sportsbook Confidential and another Sportsbook lesson for you. So with that being said, let us get some winners, and I'll play the outro music for you. Take care.